Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of State of Mind. This will be Part 15, Chapter 12, entitled Heroes of Today. Class 1A took turns giving their hero names. Several of them were shot down, while Izuku considered his own. His first thought was that Deku could be a good enough hero name after what Uraraka had said about it. He had grown a lot since Kacchan had first given him the nickname, and considering that some people already called him that, it could work. But that's all it was, a nickname. And Izuku was different now. He wasn't Deku. He didn't want to have a hero name rooted in pain and abuse. He wasn't that person anymore. Izuku sat up straighter. He knew what he wanted his hero name to be. He took a deep breath and then scribbled on his board. Izuku looked up when Todoroki was called to the front of the classroom. He stepped behind the podium and held up his board, meeting Izuku's eyes. His board simply said Shoto. Well, if that was what he wanted, Izuku gave the boy a small thumbs up, and Todoroki lazily blinked at him. Soon after that, it was Izuku's turn, and he hesitantly went up to stand behind the podium. The rest of the class had been so confident when showing their hero names, but that was something that Izuku was not. He'd never been a very confident person. After a moment, Izuku lifted his board for everyone to see, looking away so that he wouldn't have to see their reactions. "That's a very interesting name," Midnight observed, peering at his board. "Why that one?" Izuku looked at her, biting the inside of his cheek. There was a lot to it, but a simple answer would be the best for now. So all he said was, "I like watching the sky and the stars." Midnight tilted her head at him, but considered the hero name with eyes that seemed to hold more understanding than they should have. Izuku wondered if Mike or Aizawa had told her something about him. She had visited several times since he had been staying with them, and he knew they were close, so it wasn't unlikely she knew about his abuse, or more. After a moment she smiled, with a nod, waving him back to his seat. Izuku looked at the class, catching sight of Todoroki giving him his own subtle thumbs up. Izuku smiled and settled into his seat in front of Shinso, exhaling heavily. He glanced at his board, at the thick black lines his marker had made that stood for so much. Nova, a transient astronomical event. It was a short burst of light that, after it was done, it returned to normal, much like how Izuku felt he did. His normal usually being more withdrawn and steely. He recalled how he had felt during the sports festival's obstacle race, the excitement and giddiness, and how absolutely different it was from his normal self. His new burn scar from Todoroki was also in the shape of a star, which had originally made him think of the idea of Nova being his hero name. The scar symbolized to him how much he had changed since he had been the scared boy, cowering in front of his father and his school bullies. In front of everyone, really. He had a burn scar from a friend now, an actual friend. An equal, not an abuser. The star scar showed how far he had come and how far he was willing to go for what he wanted, and to help those who needed it, like Todoroki. Izuku also just really liked space. He always had. It was one of the reasons he always enjoyed wearing colorful space-themed leggings. It was always comforting and refreshing to look up at the wide expanse of the sky and think about who he was in the small world that was Earth. When he was younger, it scared him. It made him feel claustrophobic to look at the sky. But the older he got, the more reassuring it was to look up at the stars. A tap on his shoulder made Izuku look behind him. "Nova is a really cool name. I have no idea what to do for mine. I don't really care all that much," Shinso whispered, while Midnight yelled at Kacchan for the second time for his name. Izuku's brows drew together in thought, and he absently picked at his nails. He considered Shinso's quirk. His hero name couldn't be something super obvious because his quirk, at the moment, relied a lot on people not knowing exactly what it was. It needed to be something symbolic, something to do with deception. Izuku leaned back excitedly and whispered, "What about Dolos? Because—" "Shinso, your turn," Midnight said. Izuku made a face, but Shinso ignored him and quickly scribbled on his board and walked up to stand behind the podium. He set his board on the wood, and in messy, quick handwriting it said, Dolos. Izuku looked at the purple-haired boy, aghast. Shinso just shrugged at him, face blank. Izuku buried his face in his hands, mildly embarrassed at how easily Shinso had gone with the hero name without even knowing why Izuku had said it. Either he trusted Izuku enough to believe it really did mean something, or he just honestly did not care what his hero name was. Midnight agreed, and Shinso returned to his seat, looking amused at Izuku's reaction. After the names, Aizawa went back to stand behind the podium, his yellow sleeping bag hanging off him at the waist. He held a large stack of papers in his hands. Now that everyone's decided on their hero names, we'll go back to talking about the internships. They will last for a week. As for where you'll have them, those who had offers from the pros will be given your own lists, so you can choose from those yourself. Their teacher held up a sheet of paper he had taken from the top of the pile. Those who didn't have offers will choose from among the 40 hero agencies across the country that'll be accepting our interns. They all work in different places and have different specialties. Think carefully before you choose. The papers were then handed out, and Izuku tensed when a literal stack was set on his desk. He gulped, looking down at it without touching it, his eyes falling onto the first name. Izuku's shoulders crept up to his ears, and his arms crossed around him. He looked over at Todoroki, who must have seen something in his eyes because he was immediately leaving his seat and walking over to stand next to Izuku's desk, his own small sheaf of papers in his hand. Izuku wordlessly pointed at the first name on his sheet, the most renowned hero agency. Endeavor Hero Agency. Todoroki met Izuku's eyes, and then lifted his own small stack, pointing on the first name on his list. Endeavor Hero Agency. From the front of the room, Aizawa said, Turn in your choices before the weekend. Make your decisions efficiently. Dismissed. Aizawa walked out, followed by Shinso. Izuku quickly stood. I'll text you later, Peppermint. I need to ask Aizawa something. He gave his friend an apologetic look before rushing after his teacher, catching him down the hallway talking to Shinso. They both looked up when Izuku approached. Sorry, Izuku said, looking between the two of them. I didn't mean to interrupt. What do you need, problem child? Aizawa said, with a small sigh. I was wondering if you could, Izuku hesitated, suddenly nervous. His hands played with the stitches in his gloves. Aizawa only watched him, waiting. Izuku inhaled, forcing himself to speak. I was wondering if you could help me practice the new aspect of my quirk. Izuku trailed off when he caught the slightly amused expression on Aizawa's face. You can practice with us at Ground Omega, Aizawa said, and abruptly turned, leaving Izuku and Shinso to follow after him like ducklings. The two students walked side by side. Izuku's arms crossed over his chest as he considered everything. Shinso must be training with Eraserhead frequently, and he wondered how long that had been going on, or if that was a recent development since the boy was in the hero course now. Shinso would be a good addition to Izuku's training if he was able to summon the rain but was unable to stop it. That was originally why he wanted the Erasure Hero, but Shinso's brainwashing would probably work well too, and besides, Izuku had liked the feeling of being caught in the purple-haired boy's quirk, as weird as that was. Shinso gave him a strange look that Izuku caught out of the corner of his eye, and Izuku frowned. Are you all right? Yeah, I'm fine, Izuku reassured, tossing up a thumb. He supposed he was still feeling rather depressed and sad, but it wasn't nearly as bad as the day after the sports festival. That had been a bad day. Neither Mike nor Aizawa had been able to get him off the couch to eat, and Izuku had just felt so numb, broken. He hadn't felt human. Izuku really hated days like that. That had been the first time he hadn't been alone for it, though, and that had changed everything. Knowing there was actually someone who cared about him near was substantial for his state of mind. Shinso seemed to accept the answer because he turned to watch Aizawa's back, leading them to Ground Omega. They made a stop to change into their gym uniforms first, and Izuku hid in a stall, still not comfortable with his scars being seen, even by Shinso, and even though the ones on his arms had been seen by everyone at the sports festival. When they arrived, Aizawa led them deeper into the trees and then turned to face them. "Midoriya, I'm assuming you wanted me to erase your quirk if you couldn't control it." The boy nodded. "Well, you do whatever you need to. Shinso and I will be near working on hand-to-hand combat. You can join us whenever you finish if you want." Izuku nodded again, and then walked a yard or two away to sit on the ground next to a tree. He folded his legs and took deep breaths. Shinso and Aizawa were still nearby when they began sparring, so Izuku felt comfortable enough to close his eyes and focus on the lava rain that he had uncovered in his match against Kacchan. He didn't know how it worked or why it had happened then and never before. With his eyes closed and his body in a meditative position, Izuku breathed evenly and focused on his mindscape and everything he knew about it. It was unstable at best, changing depending on his emotions. In his experience, things would be destroyed if he was in an elevated panic state, but not everything, because according to Yagi, he had retrieved the All Might figurine, and Izuku had definitely had panic attacks while it was in his mindscape, which made him think that his mind had subconsciously protected it, and maybe he could do the same with people too. And then the lava rain had protected him as well, forming a clean circle around him, but hurting Kacchan. Izuku felt like he was missing something important, but he didn't know what it was. So instead of worrying about it, Izuku inhaled and then actively tried to bring back the lava rain. Nothing happened. Izuku kept trying for quite some time, and nothing continued to happen. And then everything Izuku thought he knew about the lava rain was dashed away when it began to regularly rain. On him. Izuku opened his eyes, brows drawing together when he looked up to see the rain all around him with no sign of rain clouds or darkness. He frowned deeply, incredibly confused as water droplets fell down his face and drenched his hair and shoulders. The sound of someone laughing had Izuku looking over at Aizawa and Shinso, who had paused their sparring to look at him. Apparently the rain didn't reach that far, and Izuku was the only one being soaked. Aizawa also appeared to be hiding an amused grin behind his capture weapon, watching him. Getting thoroughly drenched, Izuku closed his eyes and calmly focused on stopping the rain. It barely even took a second before it stopped falling all around him. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief and opened his eyes again. "At least I didn't have to cancel it," Aizawa chuckled, both of them still watching him. Izuku scowled and pulled his hair to the side, wringing it out. He wiped his face with his sleeves, and the other two continued their sparring. The rain must be like every other part of his mind, relying on his emotions. From experience, Izuku knew that when he was feeling panicked that his mindscape became destructive, as evidenced by Hatsume's babies and the cup Izuku had melted accidentally. He had definitely been panicking during the match with Kacchan, and he wanted desperately to defend himself, so that must be why it had been lava, rather than regular rain. Because that's what had been in his mindscape. Izuku found himself picturing his panicked mindscape as Mount Doom. His state of mind today had been dreary and rather sad if not detached. He deduced that it must be raining in his mindscape, and the ability he had uncovered was that he could only summon whatever was happening in his mindscape into the present real world. But what did that mean? Izuku felt like there was so much more to it. Why did his quirk have to be so confusing? Izuku ended up leaving the practice early when Yagi texted him, asking for his presence in the teacher's lounge. Knowing that he would meet Mike and Aizawa at the usual time to go back to their place, Izuku headed back up to the UA building, and then up to the teacher's lounge where Yagi waited for him in his skinny form, tea sitting in front of him, greeting Izuku when he walked in to sit in front of him on the couch. Izuku practically collapsed into the cushions and clutched the cup between his hands. He had changed back into his regular uniform on the way, but his hair was still wet, and he was cold. "Why are you wet, my boy? I don't believe it was raining today," All Might began. Izuku snorted. "I tried to summon the lava rain again, but all I got was regular rain." Yagi raised an eyebrow at him. "That's interesting." "Yeah," Izuku sighed. "I think I have to be in a desperate and panicked state of mind to get the lava rain." "What state of mind caused regular rain?" Yagi watched his successor with understanding eyes. Izuku took a sip of his tea. "Sad. Depressed, I guess. Those cause regular rain, I believe." I wonder what happiness would bring forth. Yagi wondered out loud, leaning into the back of the couch sadly. Izuku only shrugged, looking down into his knee. Well, anyway, Midnight told me you chose your hero name. Nova. Izuku perked up, eyes brightening. Yeah, what do you think? Yagi tapped the side of his cup thoughtfully. Don't novae only last for a short period of time before fading? Izuku nodded rapidly. Yes, that's part of it. They shine very brightly for a short period of time and then fade. They're extremely powerful and brilliant during that time. You did seem like a completely different person during the matches in the sports festival, Yagi noted, quirking his mouth up in a half-smile. And you do seem to have a space theme going on. Izuku looked down, embarrassed. It's a good name, young Izuku, but you always shine brightly. Izuku's breath stuttered in his chest, and he looked at his mentor with wide eyes. The man gave him a smile before changing the subject. Have you chosen who you will go with for your work studies? Izuku, still recovering from the shining bright comment, shook his head. No, not yet. Well, Gran Torino wanted to extend a late invitation as well, but don't feel obligated to go with him. Yagi set down his own cup and laid his hands on his knees. You shouldn't go with Gran just because he knows I'll go with Gran Torino. Izuku nodded resolutely. I think that's the best choice. Yagi shrugged. If you're sure, I will let him know. Izuku nodded and then stood. I should probably get going. Mike is taking me back to their place. Yagi stood. All right. Be safe, my boy. Izuku gave Yagi a small smile before exiting the room. The afternoon before Izuku left for his work study, he sat at a small cafe in the city. He had arrived early and held a bright pink drink to his chest while he watched out of the window to his right. His hair was pinned back with yellow pins but was otherwise down. The hair on the right side of his head was a little bit longer now. He could pinch it easily between his fingers. Izuku wore an outfit similar to what he always wore, leggings that reminded him of a Nova with soft blue shorts over them, and a plain black long-sleeve shirt with sleeves that were just a little too long. He wore the beanie that Yagi had gotten him, and the gloves Aizawa and Mike had given him. He was anxious, and found himself biting the nails of the exposed fingers on his left hand. He didn't have to wait long, though, and found the afternoon turning, as a woman with long green hair walked through the door and gently sat down in front of him, with a shy expression. Hi, Izuku, she murmured. Hi, Mom. Izuku sighed, setting his drink down in front of him, and sliding his fingers along the rim of the lid. So, how have you been? The woman asked cautiously. Izuku sighed, again, heavier this time. You don't have to pretend to care. Izuku, I do care, I promise. Izuku cut her off, lifting his head to meet her eyes for the first time. Mom, he grimaced. Please, Izuku's shoulders sagged, and he shook his head, giving up. I'm doing a bit better. I have people that I care about and that care about me. I'm better. What about the scar? She whispered, gesturing to her own head. I saw on the sports festival that you... A hard gaze had fallen over Izuku's face, and she shuddered. You don't get to ask that. Inko's stomach plummeted, but she nodded. They sat in an uncomfortable silence for a moment before she hesitantly stood. She couldn't take any more. It's good to see you, Izuku. I'm proud of you. I'm glad you're doing better, and thank you for meeting with me. Izuku gritted his teeth, looking away, allowing his hair to fall over his eyes while he was fighting tears. His hands clenched in the fabric of his shorts. I brought something for you. I'll just leave it here. Inko said something next to Izuku, but he didn't look. I'll keep sending the money to your account to survive on, and please, stay safe. And then she was walking away, back out of his life. As soon as Izuku heard the bell of the door jingle, signaling that she was gone, Izuku buried his head in his arms, muffling his sobs. When he, mostly, regained control of his tear ducts, Izuku stood, package in one hand and his drink in the other. He tossed both in the trash on his way out. He took a train to get to Dagoba Beach and then walked the rest of the way, still wiping the incessant tears from his eyes. There were a couple of people walking about, but Izuku went to the most secluded place he could find and collapsed into the sand, pulling his knees into his chest. Apparently he wasn't done crying because the tears continued to run down his cheeks for some time. That was how Yagi found the boy. He had taken to coming to the beach for several reasons. He liked seeing people there, enjoying his successor's hard work, and he also just thought that it was an amazing view and a beautiful place to spend some time. He caught sight of Izuku, recognizing the green beanie he had gotten for the boy when he was in the hospital. Yagi immediately turned to go to him, but faltered when he saw the boy curled up into himself, his knees to his chest and his arms wrapped around them, his face buried in his legs. Yagi shook his head and continued closer. "Izuku, my boy, are you all right?" he asked when he was close enough. The green-haired boy lifted his head, and Yagi's heart stuttered in his chest. Red ringed eyes and inflamed cheeks suggested he had been crying. A lot. Izuku shook his head and buried his head back in his legs. Yagi sighed and sat down next to him, laying an arm across his shoulders and tugging him against his side. The boy was stiff and didn't relax, even with his idol near. "Do you want to talk about it?" Yagi asked softly. There was silence for a bit, and then Izuku spoke. "I met with my mom." His voice was stifled, with his face being pushed into his legs. It seemed that the boy still had more to say, so Yagi gave him some time. "It didn't actually go badly," Izuku exhaled shakily, turning his head to push against Yagi's ribs, nuzzling. "I don't know why I'm so sad." The boy eventually finished, and Yagi was almost overwhelmed with a protective surge, and he squeezed the boy's shoulders. "It's okay to just be sad sometimes," the #1 hero murmured gently. Izuku didn't answer, and they sat in silence for a moment. Looking out at the water, Yagi speculated on what had brought him and the boy together this night. Coincidence? It could have been, but no matter what it was, Yagi was glad that he had been able to find his successor and comfort him. Eventually, Izuku's phone made a strange, high-pitched chirp, and he pulled it from his pocket. "It's Mike," Izuku said, clearing his throat. "They're wondering where I am. It's strange, having people actually wondering where I am. I'm still not used to it." Yagi's heart clenched, and he swallowed before releasing his hold on Izuku. "Well, perhaps you should return to them. You're heading off to Grand tomorrow, right?" The boy nodded. "Well, trust me when I say you're going to want to be as well rested as possible. If you thought the man was rough on you before—" His warning trailed off as memories of vomiting onto a wooden floor filled him. He shuddered. Izuku stood, stretching, limbs popping. He yawned, and then looked sideways down at Yagi, eyes still red. "Thank you." His hands wrung together. "Thank you for being there." Yagi pulled himself up and nodded. "Of course, my boy. Good luck tomorrow. Please let me know if you need anything." Izuku nodded to him before walking away, his small form disappearing around a corner. Yagi sighed, rolling his shoulders. He hoped that Izuku's work studies went well and unimpeded. The boy deserved it. The next morning, Shoto stood with the rest of the class while their teacher gave them a lecture that he mainly tuned out. Aizawa gave his number to all of them, with the instructions to use it only in the case of an emergency. Then they were finally dismissed to board their trains, and Shoto watched Midoriya and Uraraka immediately run to say something to Ida. Shoto turned to follow them, also concerned about Ida, when a hand fell on his left shoulder. He turned to see Aizawa standing behind him. "Sir?" he asked. Aizawa released him, and they faced each other. "I've looked into your situation a bit, and I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that you can call or text if you ever need anything." Shoto had stilled, paling. Did Midoriya tell you something? Aizawa's eyes narrowed. Midoriya hasn't said anything to me about you. Should he? Shoto relaxed slightly and shook his head. I'll make sure to text or call if I need anything. Thank you. Aizawa seemed to be searching his eyes for something, before sighing heavily and then gesturing for him to go on. Shoto nodded to him, and then headed to his train. The others had already broken up and gotten on their own trains by then, so Shoto headed to his alone. When he checked his phone on the way, he found messages in their chat wishing everyone luck. Shinso had been added at some point as well, and he had also sent his own well wishes, despite being as quiet as Shoto most of the time. Shoto appreciated all the messages. He would need all the luck where he was going. All right, listeners, this concludes the first half to Chapter 12 of State of Mind. The second half to this chapter will be up next, which will contain Hosu. Let me know your thoughts and reactions to this chapter so far, and as always, thank you all so much for listening.